He wakes gasping. The sound tears out of him before consciousness fully arrives. A raw animal thing. The sound of a man surfacing from drowning. His hands clutch at the furs piled across his chest, fingers digging deep into wool and hide. And for a single suspended moment, Robb Stark does not know where he is, or when he is, or whether the cold flooding through his body is the cold of the twins or something else entirely. The darkness presses close. Stone walls, the familiar groan of timber. A fire burned low in the hearth, its embers pulsing like a slow, impatient heart. Winter fell. He lies absolutely still. The mind of a man who has died does not reorganize itself gently. The memories return the way the arrows returned, without warning, without mercy, punching through him in sequence. Walder Frey's hall, hung with Stark banners that were not a welcome but a closing trap. The music shifting, the crossbows rising from behind the gallery rails. Talisa first, her hands pressed to her belly, her eyes wide with a surprise that had no time to become understanding. His men falling around him, the screams swallowed by the sound of steel and horror, and the methodical efficiency of men who had planned this moment down to its last cruel detail. And Roose Bolton, standing there with a stillness that was not shock but satisfaction, leaning close with the knife, speaking those 4 words in that quiet and courteous voice. The knife finding the place beneath his ribs where nothing could stop what came next. He remembers the cold. He remembers the floor. He remembers exactly how it felt to fail every person who had ever trusted him. Robb's breathing slows by degrees. He does not sit up. He stares at the ceiling of his childhood bedchamber, at the familiar shadows and the familiar grain of the timber above him, and he performs the most important calculation of his resurrected life. He sifts through what he knows the way a general surveys a map before dawn, searching for the date, the position, the distance remaining before disaster. Ned is alive. He knows this not with hope, but with certainty, because the grief of his father's execution was its own specific wound, and he does not feel that wound now. It is absent. The absence itself is the information. Ned Stark is alive and below him, somewhere in these ancient corridors, breathing and whole and unaware of the axe that will one day rise above him in King's Landing. Bran is whole, 2 legs, no fall, no broken years ahead of him in the cold and the dark beyond the wall. Jon is still his brother in every way that has ever mattered. Sansa has not yet learned the particular kind of cruelty that courtly life teaches to girls who trust the wrong smiles. Arya has not yet become something forged entirely by grief and necessity. Rickon is still only a boy playing at swords in the yard. They are all here. They are all intact. And the machinery that will destroy them, the Lannister scheming, the Frey betrayal, the Bolton patience, the 1,000 small and catastrophic choices that Robb Stark made with honor and lost with blood. That machinery has not yet been set in motion. He has time. The word settles into him with a weight he does not entirely have language for. Time. He was dead. He was cold on the floor of the twins, with his crown stripped from his head and his name already being reduced to cautionary legend. And now time stretches ahead of him again, not as gift or miracle, but as territory to be taken, as ground to be held. He does not make the mistake of feeling grateful. Gratitude is a distraction. He has returned to a place where the game is still in its earliest moves, and he will not waste whatever strange fortune or fury has brought him here by spending it on sentiment. Robb Stark lies in the pre-dawn dark of Winterfell, and he thinks about Walder Frey. The way a man thinks about a knife he has already been cut by once. He thinks about Roose Bolton, about the quality of stillness in that man, how he had mistaken it for loyalty when it was in fact simply the patience of a predator who had chosen his moment with great care. He thinks about Tywin Lannister, who played the game without apology and won more than he lost because he never once confused honor with strategy. He thinks about every choice that had felt righteous and had ended in ruin. Marrying Talisa, breaking the Frey pact for love, trusting the wrong men with the wrong information at the wrong time, letting his enemies believe he was predictable because he was good. He will not be predictable. The fire in the hearth settles with a soft collapse of ember. Gray light has begun to press at the edges of the shuttered window. The first suggestion of a Winterfell dawn, cold and slow and indifferent. Below, somewhere in the depths of the castle, he can hear the earliest stirrings of the household waking. A door, a distant voice, the old rhythms of a home does not yet know it is living inside borrowed time. Robb sits up. His hands are steady. His jaw is set. He reaches for his shirt in the dark, and he begins to think through who he will need to speak to first, and how, and what careful shape the truth will need to take. Because his father will be in that hall within the hour, and Ned Stark, for all his greatness, has never once in his life understood that love can be a liability. And today, that lesson cannot wait. He does not go to his father immediately. That is the first calculation, and it is the right one. A boy who rushes to his father with warnings and whispers, before the household has even taken its morning bread, is a boy who will be questioned, doubted, perhaps even sent back to bed, with a hand pressed to his forehead to check for fever. Robb understands this now in a way he never did the first time. He moves through the early corridors of Winterfell slowly, deliberately, letting the castle wake around him rather than ahead of him. The great halls of Winterfell smell of wood smoke and cold stone, and something older beneath both. The deep mineral scent of a fortress that has stood through 10,000 winters, absorbing all of them. He walks these passages, and he notices them, truly notices them, in a way he never permitted himself before. The worn flags underfoot, the places where the mortar between stones has been repointed, generation after generation, never letting the cold find a way through. He had grown up inside these walls without ever truly seeing them. That is over now. Bran finds him first. His brother comes bounding around a corner with all the inexhaustible energy of a boy who does not yet know what it means to fall, and the sight of him, upright, whole, both legs carrying him at full speed, strikes Robb somewhere behind the sternum with a force he does not show. He catches Bran by the shoulders, holds him for a moment longer than is perhaps expected, and Bran squirms and laughs and asks him what is wrong with him. Nothing, Robb says. Nothing at all. And he means it, and does not mean it simultaneously, which is the condition he suspects he will live inside for a very long time. He spends that morning with Bran and Arya both, letting himself be pulled into their orbit, their noise, their complete and magnificent indifference to consequence. Arya is already arguing with a servant about whether she ought to be practicing needlework or not, and Robb takes her side without hesitation, which earns him a look of suspicious delight from her because he had never done so before. She does not know why he is different. She simply knows that he is, and she decides she approves, and that is enough. Theon Greyjoy appears at midday, He comes as he always came in those early days, easy in his stride, a smirk already loaded and ready, some quip balanced on his tongue about one thing or another, and Robb watches him approach and performs the most difficult act he has yet attempted since waking inside his own younger body. He smiles. He responds. He does not let a single flicker of what he carries cross his face, because the version of Theon that stands before him now has not yet done anything. He is still only a ward, still only a young man shaped by captivity and pride into someone who will one day make a catastrophic choice. That choice has not been made. It will not be made if Robb is careful enough. And so, he is careful. He lets the friendship continue its familiar rhythms, but he is no longer inside it the way he once was. He is beside it now, watching it from a careful distance, never giving Theon the kind of trust that could be leveraged against him later. He does not finish removing Theon from his confidence all at once. He does not need to. Small withdrawals, made quietly over time, will accomplish what one loud severance never could. The afternoon passes. The light through the high Winterfell windows shifts from gray to pale gold to gray again, the sun refusing to fully commit even in autumn. Robb carries his knowledge through the day like a stone in his chest, heavy, constant, impossible to set down even for a moment. It is in the Godswood that he finds Jon. His brother is sitting beneath the heart tree, not praying exactly, but doing what Jon always did in that place, thinking in the way that required stillness and root dark silence to accomplish. Robb sits beside him without ceremony, without the usual performance of brotherly ease, and Jon looks at him sideways for a moment and says nothing, because Jon has always been better at silence than most people are at speech. When Robb finally speaks, he does not tell Jon everything. He cannot. There are things that cannot be handed to another person without unraveling them, and Jon is too important to be unraveled now. He tells him instead that he has dreamed. He uses that word carefully, deliberately, dreamed, because it carries weight in their world, in the old traditions of the North, without demanding the kind of explanation that truth would require. He tells Jon the dream was terrible. He tells him he saw fire and ruin and the things that wait beyond the wall, the things that make every other conflict between every other lord in every other castle seem like children quarreling over the last piece of bread. He tells Jon he is afraid of what the dream means if Jon leaves too soon. Jon is quiet for a long time after that. The Godswood settles around them both. The red leaves of the heart tree do not move, and the carved face in its pale trunk watches them with its deep, gouged eyes that have watched 10,000 years of Starks come and go. Jon says, finally, that he has already given his word to Benjen. Robb says he knows. The fire crackles somewhere distant, beyond the trees, beyond the walls. Above them, the first stars are beginning to appear in the early dark of a northern sky, cold and precise and utterly without mercy. Neither of them moves. The summons arrives 3 days later. It comes by royal rider, sealed in wax the color of old blood, and it bears the stag of House Baratheon pressed deep into that seal, as though the king himself leaned his full weight upon it. Robert Baratheon, first of his name, King of the Seven Kingdoms, wishes Eddard Stark to ride south and serve as Hand of the King. The honor is extraordinary. The expectation is absolute. The word wishes does the work of a blade held quietly at the throat. Ned reads it in his solar with the fire burning low and his face doing the thing it always does when he carries something heavy. Going very still, going very careful, the way stone goes still beneath water. He does not share it immediately. He turns it over. He sets it down. He picks it up again. Robb finds out before noon. He does not let himself react the way the boy who died at the twins would have reacted. Which is to say, he does not let himself feel the cold sweep of it, does not let the memory of everything that followed ride up through him like a horse cresting a hill. He presses that down. He has learned in these strange weeks of living backward through time that reaction is a luxury and that grief is a distraction he cannot afford to spend. He has a window. He has perhaps one conversation. He has to make it count. He goes to his father in the evening when the last of the household has withdrawn and the light through the solar's narrow windows has gone the color of pewter. He does not knock the way a son knocks. He knocks the way a man knocks when he has something terrible to say, and no way to say it that does not sound like madness. Ned looks up. He sees something in Robb's face that makes him set down his quill. Robb speaks carefully. He says that he knows about the letter. He says he has known something was coming. Not how, not in terms he can explain cleanly, but with a certainty that does not bend when he pushes against it. He says King's Landing is dangerous in ways that the honor of the summons is designed to conceal. He does not say Cersei yet. He does not say Littlefinger yet. He says the court is a place where men with a king's ear are not men who wish the king well, and that the king is too loud and too warm and too trusting to see what moves quietly around him in the dark. Ned says his name in a tone that is warning and question at once. Robb does not stop. He says it with the grief he cannot fully hide. The grief of a man who has watched his father walk into a room and not come back out, which is a specific kind of grief, a particular wound that does not close cleanly even across lifetimes. He says, "Father, I am asking you to listen to me the way you would listen to a Meister who had studied this for 20 years, because I cannot tell you everything I know, but I know enough to be afraid for you." He does not finish the sentence beyond that. He does not need to. Ned is quiet. The fire breathes between them. What moves behind Ned Stark's eyes in that silence is the calculation of a man who raised this boy from nothing and knows every register of his voice. Robb has never spoken to him like this. Not once. Not with this weight. Not with this specific texture of grief held back behind deliberate words. Ned has heard men lie. He has heard men perform conviction. This is neither. This is something older and more costly. He cannot name it. He listens. Robb tells him to take the girls south. Both of them, Arya and Sansa both, because separating them is a mistake, because the capital will treat them differently, and he needs them together where the household can account for them. He tells him to choose the guards not for ceremony, but for loyalty, and he gives names. Jory, yes. Jory always. But others too. Men whose names Ned recognizes. Men from old families sworn deep into Stark service. Men who will not be impressed or seduced or frightened by Southern gold. Ned writes the names down. He does not ask how Robb knows them. He writes them down. The letter to Lysa Tully is harder. Robb composes it alone in his own chamber by a single candle that makes the shadows of his hands enormous against the wall. He writes slowly. He cannot say Littlefinger will betray you, because that is the kind of accusation that burns the messenger along with the message. He cannot say he has always wanted Catelyn and you are only what he settled for. because that is a cruelty without strategic value. He writes instead about trust, about the way trust in great houses must be earned through demonstrated caution rather than assumed through proximity. He writes that there are men in King's Landing whose ambitions are architectures built over decades, invisible until the roof comes down. He writes, "Be careful of those who are kind to your mother." He seals it himself. He finds a rider he trusts, not a household man, not anyone who moves through the castle's regular rhythms. And he presses the letter into his hands before the next dawn. Whether it will reach her in time is not something he can know. Whether she will understand it is not something he can control. He stands in the cold before the castle's outer gate and watches the rider disappear into the gray morning, and somewhere behind him, inside the walls of Winterfell, his father is already reading the royal summons again. But reading it this time with different eyes, slower eyes, the eyes of a man who has been warned. Ned leaves on a gray morning 3 days later, and Robb watches from the battlements as the column moves south. His father's straight back, the Stark banners catching no wind in the still air, the horses breathing steam into the cold. He watches until the column is gone. Then he turns back toward Winterfell, and something settles in him like a lock finding its mechanism. The castle is his now, not permanently, not proudly. There is no pride in what he knows is coming, but functionally, operationally, in every way that matters, he is the acting Lord of Winterfell, and he has perhaps a season, perhaps less, before the world requires something more terrible from him than lordship. He begins that same afternoon. The first thing he does is call Maester Luwin, not to ask for counsel, not yet, but to review the grain stores, the garrison strength, the status of every road and bridge between Winterfell and the southern passes. Luwin is meticulous and unsurprised, because Luwin has watched Robb grow into something harder than expected these past weeks, something quieter and more deliberate. And the Maester is wise enough to serve what is rather than what he remembers. The numbers are adequate. Adequate is not enough. Robb tells him to begin quiet correspondence with the lords of White Harbor, to frame it as a young lord introducing himself properly to a great house, which is exactly the kind of thing a dutiful son would do in his father's absence, and therefore exactly the kind of thing that will draw no attention. Lord Manderley is the key that opens the North's southern flank. Robb knows this the way he knows the names of the dead, not from study but from consequence, from the memory of what happened when Manderley's loyalty was tested and the price extracted for it. He writes the letter himself without Luwin's assistance, because the language has to be precisely calibrated, respectful without being supplicant, friendly without being familiar, interested in White Harbor's prosperity in a manner that implies partnership rather than extraction. He mentions trade. He mentions the road from Barrowton. He mentions, almost as an aside, that a young lord new to his responsibilities would value the wisdom of a house as experienced in the management of great affairs as House Manderley. It is flattery, but flattery dressed in the clothes of sincerity. And Wyman Manderley, whatever else he is not a fool. He will read it correctly, which means he will read it as a young man trying to build something real, and he will not be wrong. The letter to Bear Island is different. Mage Mormont does not respond to flattery or implication. She responds to directness, to the suggestion that you believe her capable of handling the unadorned truth. Robb writes her a letter about wolves. He writes about what a pack does when it senses the season changing, how it tightens, pulls inward, stations itself closer to the den. He does not explain the metaphor. He does not need to. He signs it and sends it north before he allows himself to consider whether it is too much, too soon, too transparent. It is not. He knows it is not. He has made this mistake before, the mistake of waiting, the mistake of trusting that the right people would understand without being told, and he will not make it again. The letters from King's Landing arrive in clusters, each one carrying less reassurance than the last. Ned writes with the careful language of a man who is not yet certain his concerns are founded. But Robb reads the careful language like a code and finds beneath it something close to alarm. The court is exactly what he remembers. The smiling surfaces, the invisible currents, the way Cersei moves through rooms like something calculating every exit. His father mentions Littlefinger twice in the span of a single letter, mentions him with a kind of cautious appreciation that makes Robb's hands tighten on the parchment until the edges crease. He reads the letters twice, then sets them into the fire, not to hide them, because there is nothing in them that would condemn anyone, but because he does not want to read them a third time and find himself hoping something has changed. Nothing has changed. The wheel turns the way it always turned. What he can do is be ready before the wheel completes its rotation. He calls the garrison master to his solar on a Tuesday. Unscheduled, unannounced, the kind of summons that tells a man his lord is not performing lordship, but actually conducting it. He frames what he wants carefully. Not a mobilization, not a muster, a training exercise, the kind of thing a young lord might order to demonstrate that the North's teeth are not rusting in peacetime, the kind of thing that justifies pulling levies from the outer holdfasts and assembling them closer to Winterfell without anyone in King's Landing being able to name it preparation. The garrison master nods. He is a practical man who has served practical lords and recognizes the shape of what he is being asked to do, even when the shape is not named aloud. The ravens go out within the week. Training exercises, extended maneuvers. The lords who receive them will know, as Robb intends them to know, that something is being prepared behind the word exercise. But none of them will say so openly, because none of them have been given reason yet to refuse. He is not asking them to march. He is asking them to be ready. The first reply comes from an unexpected direction, not from Manderley, not from Mormont, but from a minor lord 3 days' ride east of Winterfell, a man named Tallheart, whose letter is short and contains only one line of substance beneath its formal courtesies. It reads, "We await your word, my lord, and we have awaited it longer than you know." Robb reads the line 3 times. Then he sets the letter down very carefully on the table, smooths it flat with his palm, and sits for a long moment in the silence of the solar, thinking about what it means that the North has been watching him, watching and waiting, and deciding what it is they think they see. The letter from King's Landing arrives on a gray morning, carried by a rider who has not slept in 4 days and whose horse is half dead beneath him. The man dismounts in the courtyard with the careful deliberateness of someone who knows his legs may not hold, and he does not speak until he is standing before Robb directly in the great hall with Maester Luwin at his side and the household guard at their posts. He speaks the words he has been given to speak. Ned Stark, Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North, former hand of the king, has been arrested. The charge is treason against the crown. He is held in the Red Keep by order of Queen Cersei Lannister, regent to the boy King Joffrey, first of his name. The rider finishes. He waits. Robb does not move. There's no crack in the stillness of his face, no whitening around the knuckles, no sharp breath drawn through teeth. He has been waiting for this message since the moment he woke into this life, knowing what lay ahead. He has been waiting for it the way a man waits for the tide, understanding that the water does not care about his grief, that it will come whether he is ready or not. And so, the only question that has ever mattered is whether he will be standing on high ground when it arrives. He is standing on high ground. He has spent months making certain of it. He thanks the rider. He instructs that the man be given food and rest, and a fresh horse if he requires one. He dismisses the hall with quiet words and a steady hand. It is only when the room has emptied, only when it is Robb and Luwin and the cold hearthlight, that something shifts in his expression. Not grief, not yet, but something older and more careful than grief. The thing that lives underneath it when a man has learned not to let pain move faster than his mind. "Send ravens," he says. "You know which lords." Luwin does know. He has known since the training exercises began, since the extended maneuvers were dispatched, since the careful architecture of the past months began to take its shape. He goes without another word. Robb stands alone for a moment in the great hall of Winterfell, beneath the banners of his house, and lets himself feel, briefly and precisely, exactly what he feels. The cold fury of a son who knows his father is in a cell below a city built by people who will not hesitate to take a head if it serves them. And then he folds that feeling into the place inside himself where it will burn as fuel rather than consume him as fire. He has learned this too in the long months of preparation. Grief in its proper place is a lantern. Grief let loose is a wildfire. He cannot afford the wildfire. His father cannot afford it. He rides for the twins within the week, not with the desperate urgency of a young lord scrambling south to cross a river before a cunning old man can leverage his fear into a marriage contract wrested from necessity. He rides with a column of horse at his back, banners flying, ravens already dispatched ahead of him, and a document sealed with wax and witnessed by two meisters folded inside his riding cloak. He has composed the offer during the long evenings before the fire in the solar, revising it the way a careful man revises a battle plan, anticipating objections, removing vulnerabilities, ensuring that every term on the page is a term he could live with rather than a concession ground for him by circumstance. He does not need the Frey crossing the way he needed it before. He needs it, but not desperately, and the distance between those two things is everything in a negotiation. Walder Frey meets him in the main hall of the twins, surrounded by his sons and grandsons, and the general atmosphere of suspicious, watchful greed that seems to exist in the castle's very stones. The old man sits in his great chair and looks at Robb with the calculating eyes of a man who has spent a lifetime waiting for young lords to come to him in need, who has refined the reading of desperation into something close to art. What he sees in Robb's face is not desperation. He does not have a name for what he sees. It unsettles him in a way he would not admit. Robb speaks first, without preamble, without the careful circling that a younger version of himself might have performed. He lays the offer on the table. Not himself, not the king in the north, pledging himself to whichever Frey daughter is deemed most suitable. But a Stark cousin, a well-born girl of good name and genuine standing, offered freely and with specific terms that make the match more generous than anything Walder Frey could have reasonably expected to extract. The marriage would tie Frey blood to Stark blood in a bond that could not be dismissed or diminished. It comes with trade privileges along the river road. It comes with endorsements from 2 other northern lords, already written and sealed, willing to treat Frey as a peer rather than a tollkeeper. The old man stares at the document for a long time. His sons exchange glances. One of them leans down to whisper in his father's ear, and Walder waves him off with a hand. "You've thought about this," the old man says. His voice carries something between suspicion and reluctant appreciation. "For some time?" Robb answers. "Why not yourself?" Walder Frey asks the question directly, the way old men who have watched too many careful performances will sometimes simply cut through to the bone of a thing. Why not a Stark himself? Robb meets the old man's eyes. "Because what I'm offering you is worth more than my name attached to it. My name is already going south toward King's Landing. What you need is certainty. I am offering you certainty, not a promise made under pressure that a later king might set aside, but a contract witnessed, sealed, and delivered freely before any sword has been drawn." Silence settles over the hall. Walder Frey looks at the document again, and at the seals attached to it, and at the face of the young man sitting across the table from him, who does not look afraid and has not once asked for anything. He has been doing this for 70 years. He knows the smell of a man who needs something. He knows the way a lord's eyes move when there's only one road south, and he knows who controls the bridge. This boy is not looking at the bridge. It is this, more than anything, the absence of the look, that moves the old man toward agreement. He has spent his life leveraged against the desperation of others. He does not know, quite, how to price a man who arrives without desperation, and in that uncertainty, he finds something he has rarely felt in his own hall. He feels, for a moment, outmatched. The contracts are signed before sundown, witnessed by a septon brought from the castle sept, the ink still wet when Robb clasps the old man's hand with a grip that is firm and unhurried and contains no relief visible to the naked eye. The crossing will be granted. The alliance is made. The thing that was once the Red Wedding has no root here now, no soil in which to grow, because the wound that fed it, the marriage promise broken, the old man's pride crushed, the grudge nursed for a campaign season until it curdled into slaughter. That wound has never been opened. Robb walks out into the evening air of the twins' courtyard, and for the first time since the rider arrived from King's Landing, he allows himself one slow breath that is not entirely calculation. His army crosses the river the following morning, banners and all, under a sky that has finally gone clear above the hills. He rides at the front of the column, south toward whatever remains of his father in that red castle, already turning his mind to the next problem. Because the Freys are secured, yes, but Cersei Lannister is not Walder Frey, and King's Landing is not a castle that will negotiate simply because a man arrives without fear showing in his face. He is thinking about the city. He is thinking about what his father's survival will cost, and what it will require, and who in the south might still be moved. He is thinking about Tywin Lannister, who has not yet moved his army, and what it means that he has not, whether it is patience or positioning, and what the difference between those two things looks like when the answer finally arrives. The column moves south through the hills like something unhurried and inevitable. And that quality alone, that absence of urgency where urgency was expected, is the first thing that begins to unsettle the Lannister commanders watching from their positions along the Trident. They had prepared for the young wolf. They had prepared for the charge, the howling northern fury, the kind of frontal assault that makes good soldiers of boys who do not yet understand the cost of valor. They had prepared for courage worn openly, like a shield. What arrives instead is silence, measured distances, a Stark army that camps where it should not camp, that marches roads it should have no knowledge of, that divides and reforms and feints with the patience of something much older than a boy of 16 leading his first campaign. The Lannister scouts bring their reports back, and the commanders read them twice, because the first reading does not make sense. Robb gives them no single point to hold against. That is the lesson he carries from a death he remembers with absolute clarity. The lesson that valor without geometry is simply an elegant way to lose. He knows where Jaime Lannister's host is positioned. He knows the ground between them, the ridgelines, the soft approaches, the one narrow road that Jaime's outriders leave unwatched because it runs through low country that floods in spring, and they are reasoning from spring. It is not spring. Robb sends 2,000 men down that road in the dark before the moon has fully risen. Light cavalry and seasoned border fighters from the mountain hold fasts, men who have spent their lives moving quietly over difficult ground. He sends them with orders that are simple and precisely worded and contain no room for improvisation. He does not need improvisation. He has already seen this battle. He has already lived its alternative. The night engagement lasts less than an hour. Jaime Lannister fights because Jaime Lannister is constitutionally incapable of doing otherwise, and he fights brilliantly in the first moments before he understands that brilliance is not the variable being tested. He is surrounded on ground he cannot use by men who are not performing bravery but executing a plan. And there is a cold and particular terror in discovering that the enemy holding the sword to your throat is not angry at all. Robb's riders take him before the camp has fully woken to its own disaster. There is no dramatic confrontation on a hilltop, no speeches, no moment of recognition that history might remember. There is simply the Kingslayer, disarmed and outnumbered in the muddy dark, and the young wolf watching him from horseback with eyes that have seen this before, and a silence between them that Jaime cannot quite interpret. He does not know what it means, that silence. Robb does not explain it. What happens next is the deviation that no Lannister strategist has modeled, because it requires knowing something that cannot be known from the outside. That Tyrion Lannister is the only mind in King's Landing currently pointed at a solution rather than a spectacle. Robb knows it. He has had years of memory to turn it over and examine it from every angle, years to understand that his father's death was not inevitable, that it required a particular sequence of miscalculations lining up like stones in a wall, and that removing even one of those stones changes the shape of everything that follows. The stone he chooses to remove is Ned Stark's isolation. The lever he chooses is Jaime, alive and unharmed and representing the kind of asset that a family like the Lannisters cannot pretend not to value. The letter goes south by fast rider, addressed not to Cersei, not to the Hand, not to the boy king on his throne. It is addressed to Tyrion Lannister, personally, by name. That specificity is itself a message. It says that whoever has written this letter understands the difference between the face a family presents and the mind it actually operates with. Tyrion, reading it in the Tower of the Hand while the candles burn low, is quiet for a very long time. The letter is not long. It does not need to be. It offers Jaime's continued safety in exchange for Ned Stark's removal from the Black Cells, and it makes clear with the particular precision of someone who has already thought 3 moves ahead that this is not a negotiation that Tyrion will be able to bring to Cersei without losing it entirely, which means it is a negotiation that Tyrion must conduct alone. He reads it twice. He holds it over the candle flame until it catches, and then he holds the burning paper for a moment longer than is strictly necessary, watching it go to nothing. Then he sits down and begins to compose his reply. It takes 4 days, 4 days of careful movement through channels that leave no record, through intermediaries who are well paid and discreet, and asking no questions they cannot afford the answers to. And at the end of those 4 days, Ned Stark is moved from the Black Cells by a pair of guards whose paperwork contains nothing that could be traced to anyone named Lannister. He is placed in a tower room in the Red Keep, high enough to see the bay, with a door that locks from the outside and a window that does not. It is not freedom. It is not safety. It is the narrowest possible wedge of survival driven into what had been, in the world Robb remembers, an already sealed door. Robb receives the confirmation at his camp north of the Trident, reads it standing, and says nothing for long enough that the rider begins to grow uncertain. Then he folds the letter and asks for his map. His army holds its position. Jaime Lannister remains in his tent, under guard, unharmed, and the Lannister host to the south has now lost its most important piece without understanding precisely how. Tywin Lannister will hear of it soon, if he has not already, and when he does, he will begin to calculate, and that calculation is the one Robb cannot yet fully predict. Which means it is the one that requires the most immediate attention. He traces a line on the map with one finger, following the road that runs east along the Trident toward the crossroads, and he calls for Greatjon Umber, because what happens next is going to require someone who understands that the loudest threat is sometimes the one you never have to make. The map does not tell Robb everything he needs to know. It never does. It tells him roads and rivers, tells him distances measured in days of march, tells him where the armies are positioned like stones on a table. What it cannot tell him is what burns beneath the surface of a kingdom that has already begun fracturing along lines older than this war, deeper than any single grievance, and Robb knows, because he has already watched it happen once, that some fractures cannot be sealed by the hand that caused them, and some cannot be sealed at all. Stannis Baratheon does not care that Ned Stark is alive. That is the calculation Robb returns to in the hours after Greatjon departs, when the camp has settled into its evening rhythms, and the fires burn low and steady along the perimeter. Stannis pressed his claim in the other world without hesitation, without alliance, without warmth, and he presses it here with precisely the same cold arithmetic. The throne was Robert's. Robert's trueborn heir is Stannis. The children Cersei bore are not Robert's, and Stannis can prove it, and he will spend every man he has and every ship he commands in the proving of it, because Stannis Baratheon is the kind of man who would rather be righteous and dead then comfortable and wrong. Robb cannot stop him. He does not try. What he does instead is ensure that Stannis and the North are not enemies. A careful, almost invisible alignment achieved through neutral language in a single letter sent south. Language that neither endorses Stannis nor opposes him. Language that Robb spent the better part of an evening composing with the precision of a man diffusing something. Renly is the louder problem and the shallower one, which is almost worse. Renly raises his banners with all the pageantry of a man who believes the game is won by the size of the crowd watching, and perhaps in another life, he would have been right. He has the Tyrells. He has the South. He has a smile that makes people want to follow him into rooms they would not otherwise enter. What Renly does not have is patience, or time, or someone watching his back carefully enough. And Robb knows what is coming for Renly in ways that Renly cannot imagine, which means Renly is both a threat and a problem that may, in the end, resolve itself in a manner that has nothing to do with the North. Robb does not celebrate this. He notes it. He files it. He moves on. The letter from Bran arrives on a gray morning, carried by a raven from Winterfell, and Robb reads it twice before he lets himself react. Bran writes carefully, the way a child writes when he knows he is describing something that adults will not believe, choosing words like a boy picking his way across ice he cannot see the bottom of. He writes about dreams. He writes about a great tree and a raven with 3 eyes that speaks to him in a voice he cannot remember when he wakes, but cannot stop hearing when he sleeps. He writes about seeing things, distant things, things that have not happened yet, and things that happened before he was born. He does not say he is frightened. He says he does not know what to do with what he sees. Robb folds the letter slowly. He does not dismiss it. He does not laugh. In the world he remembers, Bran's gifts were real. Real enough to change the shape of history in ways that Robb only partially understood, never having lived long enough to see them fully unfold. What he understood was this. The boy had been sent north without the right protection, without anyone who believed him, without a guide who knew what they were looking at. That does not happen again. Robb calls for his most trusted Maester before the morning is done, a careful, quiet man named Aldrich, who has the rare quality of listening to things that make him uncomfortable without immediately explaining them away. Robb gives him specific instructions, written and spoken, and watches the man's face for skepticism. There is some. Robb addresses it directly. Take everything the boy says seriously, he tells Aldrich. Every dream, every vision. Record what you can. Do not tell Bran he is wrong. Do not tell him what he sees is only dreaming. Find him a teacher if one can be found. Keep him inside the walls. Keep him close. Aldrich departs within the hour. Robb watches him go and feels something that is not quite relief, more like a door held open rather than left swinging in the wind. Theon comes to him that same afternoon, and the timing is either coincidence or instinct, and Robb has learned to suspect instinct in men who feel overlooked. There is something in the set of Theon's jaw that Robb recognizes with a weariness that sits deeper than his years. The particular tension of a man who has noticed he is being managed and does not yet know whether to be angry about it. Theon asks for leave to return to the Iron Islands. He frames it as an offer, as loyalty, as military strategy, his father's fleet laid at Robb's feet like a prize. He does not say, "You have been keeping me at arm's length." He does not need to. the request says it plainly enough. Robb grants it without hesitation and watches the surprise move briefly across Theon's face before the familiar confidence settles back in like a mask resuming its position. The granting of the request is itself a message, and Robb is counting on Theon not reading it carefully enough to understand what it actually means. He smiles. He clasps Theon's shoulder. He says the words that a trusting king would say to a trusted ward, and every one of them is true in its surface meaning and carefully constructed in what it conceals. Two men ride out the following morning in Theon's company, introduced as experienced outriders selected for his safety on the road. They are Stark men. They are loyal. They carry sealed instructions that Theon will never see, and those instructions are precise on a single point. Theon Greyjoy reaches the Iron Islands. The message he carries does not. By nightfall, Robb has turned back to the map, tracing again that road east along the Trident, and a new letter has arrived. Not from Winterfell this time, not from the south, but bearing a seal he did not expect, from a direction he had not been watching closely enough. And when he breaks it open, the first line alone is enough to make him go very still. The letter is from Tyrion Lannister. This is the fact that holds Robb motionless for a long moment. The parchment flat in his hands, the fire in the solar burning low and orange behind him. Not from Cersei, who would never lower herself to such a gesture. Not from Tywin, who communicates through armies rather than correspondence. From Tyrion, the youngest, the smallest, the one his previous life had taught him to underestimate, and then to regret underestimating. The letter is short. It is precise. It proposes a meeting under a peace banner on the eastern bank of the Green Fork, at a location specific enough to signal that Tyrion already knows where Robb's outriders have been, and vague enough to offer Robb room to refuse without embarrassment. It does not threaten. It does not beg. It simply states in the dry and careful language of a man who has long survived by being the cleverest person in rooms that undervalue him, that there may be arrangements available to both parties that neither party has yet considered aloud. Robb reads it twice. Then he sets it down on the map, directly over the crossing at the Twins, and he stares at it for a long time without speaking. He sends his answer the following dawn. The meeting takes place 6 days later, on a stretch of riverbank, where the light falls gray and flat across the water, and the reeds stand motionless in windless air. There are 20 riders on each side, no more, and they hold their positions at a respectful distance, while the two men who matter walk toward each other across trampled grass, still damp with morning. Robb Stark is tall and broad in his gray cloak, wolf's head at his shoulder, crown conspicuously absent. This is deliberate. He does not need the crown to be the king. Tyrion Lannister is, as he always was, small and mismatched, and moving with the careful deliberateness of a man who learned very young that he would never be imposing, and decided instead to be something more useful. They stop at a distance of perhaps 10 feet and regard each other with the particular attention of men who have been watching each other across a war. It is Tyrion who speaks first. He says that he expected someone younger looking. Robb says that he expected someone shorter. There is a pause. Tyrion's mismatched eyes hold something that is almost amusement, and he gestures toward the simple camp chairs that attendants have already placed between them, and they sit, and the negotiation begins. Robb does not circle. He does not perform. He lays the terms on the table the way a man lays down a hand of cards he already knows has won. not with flourish, but with the quiet certainty of someone who has done the counting. The North will be independent, not a negotiating position, not an opening bid, a statement of what already exists and will continue to exist regardless of what any crown in the South declares about it. He does not want King's Landing. He does not want the Iron Throne. He does not want to march south and spend northern lives on southern stones. What he wants is his father, alive, returned across the neck and given back his home. And in exchange for that single thing, the war between North and South ends, formally, with paper and seals, and Tywin Lannister may turn his full attention back to the other three kings currently making his life complicated. Tyrion is quiet for a moment after this, his fingers pressed together in that particular way he has when he is doing rapid arithmetic behind his eyes. He knows, as Robb knows he knows, that the crown is bankrupt. He knows that Stannis has the better claim, and the harder army, and the woman with the red shadow at her back. He knows that Renly commands cheer and spectacle, and the Reach is golden grain. He knows that a northern war that costs men and gold the Lannisters cannot replace is not a war. It is a slow bleeding out. He does not finish calculating. He does not need to. He asks only one question. He asks whether Robb's word is worth anything, coming from a king who was never formally crowned in any southern sept. Robb says that his word kept his men alive when lesser words got other men killed, and that Tyrion can measure its worth accordingly. The cold peace, when it comes, is not celebrated on either side. There are no feasts. There is no great ceremony on any bridge or field. There is only the slow mechanical progress of agreement. Riders going south with letters, riders going north with replies, seals pressed into wax in rooms where men speak quietly and do not look at each other's faces when the names are read aloud. Cersei rages. Of course she rages, but Tyrion has done the thing he does best in rooms where Cersei rages, which is to wait and to speak at the precise moment when the rage has burned down to something she can be reasoned with, and to present her with the arithmetic in terms she cannot dispute without appearing foolish. The North is already gone. The North has been gone since Robb Stark won at Whispering Wood. What Cersei can gain is the pretense of choosing to release it, which is better than the reality of having it taken. Ned Stark walks out of King's Landing on a morning when the light is thin and the city smells of salt and refuse, and the particular sourness of a place that has held too many people for too long. He is thinner than he was. He moves with the careful deliberateness of a man whose body has been reminded, recently and thoroughly, that it is mortal. The black of the Night's Watch still clings to him in the shape of his bearing even after the cloth itself has been exchanged. Because some things a man carries in his posture long after the reason for them has passed. He does not look back at the Red Keep as the gate closes behind him. He does not look back once. They meet on the King's Road 3 weeks later in the late afternoon, where the road bends north through a stand of oaks, and the light comes sideways through the leaves in long pale bars. Robb is already dismounted when he sees his father's horse come around the bend. He does not wait. He crosses the distance between them on foot, and Ned is down from the saddle before Robb reaches him, and the two men hold each other on the empty road while the trees stand quiet around them and the horses shift and breathe. Robb weeps. He does not speak. He does not try to. All of it. The memory of a death he prevented. The months of careful maneuvering. The loneliness of knowing things he could not explain to anyone. The particular grief of having carried his father's face in his mind as a dead man's face, and then having to learn it again as a living one. All of it floods out of him in the plain animal way of a son who has been afraid for a very long time and is no longer afraid. Ned holds him. Ned, who does not know the full shape of what his son has survived to be standing here, who knows only that something in his boy is both older and more broken than it should be, holds him with the steady certainty of a man who has always believed that the North endures by holding on. They stand like that for a long time. When they finally separate, Ned cups the back of Robb's head for a moment, the way he used to when Robb was small, and says nothing, and Robb straightens and wipes his face and becomes the king again. It is only later, when they have made camp and the fire is going, and Ned is asleep at last with the exhausted depth of a man returned from somewhere very dark, that Robb sits watching the flames and allows himself to feel the thing he has not yet allowed himself to feel, which is that the hardest part is not over. The North is independent. His father breathes beside him, and somewhere to the south, a letter bearing a Lannister seal has already been sent to a destination Robb did not authorize, carrying terms that no one at this campfire has yet been shown, and the name written on the outside of it is not one that Robb, for all his foreknowledge, had thought to watch for. The fire burns low by the time Robb folds the last of his notes and sets them aside. He has been writing for 3 hours. His fingers are ink-stained to the second knuckle, and the candle beside him has shortened itself into a stub, and still he writes, because the work does not pause for exhaustion, and Robb Stark has learned in this second life that exhaustion is a luxury the dead cannot afford. The North is independent. That was the mountain. What comes after is the mountain range. He has a list, not written down, never written down in full, because some things are too dangerous to commit to paper, but carried in the part of his mind that was forged by memory and grief and the particular education of dying young with everything unfinished. He knows what the North lacked in his first life. He knows it in the way that only failure can teach, not theory, but bone-deep certainty, the knowledge of exactly where the structure cracked before it fell. The grain stores come first. Always in any calculation, the grain stores come first. The North is vast and cold, and the winter that waits beyond this false peace is not merely a long season, but something older and more absolute. And Robb has stood in the space between what he remembers and what he now understands long enough to know that no army fights well on empty bellies, and no people endure a long night without the reserves to see them through. He has already dispatched riders to each of the major keeps with specific instructions, not requests, instructions, on expanding storage capacity, on the rotation of surplus grain, on the salting and preserving of meat in quantities that most of his bannermen consider excessive. Let them consider it excessive. He has seen what comes. The gift is the next calculation, and the more complicated one. That stretch of land south of the wall, long under-farmed and underpopulated, has been quietly bleeding toward irrelevance for decades, its villages shrinking, its roads growing over. Robb intends to reverse that. He has spoken with his mother's Tully pragmatism and his father's Stark gravity in equal measure when framing these plans for his council. The gift must be resettled and fortified, its roads maintained, its holdings reinforced, because what stands between the wall and the rest of the North must be more than empty ground. Distance is not a defense. Distance is a delay. He needs walls within walls, depth, and the infrastructure to move men northward quickly when the time requires it. The castles are another matter. Deepwood Motte, the Dreadfort, which he watches now with the careful lateral attention of a man who has not forgotten what the name Bolton means. Moat Cailin, which he is already rebuilding in earnest, stone by stone, because he knows with the intimacy of someone who watched it fall in a life that no longer exists, what it means to lose that choke point. He has told no one why he prioritizes it with such specific intensity. He does not need to. He is the king. Priorities do not require justification. They require execution. It is 3 days after they return to Winterfell that he writes the letter to Jon. He sits with the blank page for a long time. This is the letter he has composed and recomposed in his mind across months of this second life. And the difficulty of it is not finding the words, but restraining himself to only the words that Jon will not dismiss as madness. He must tell Jon enough to act. He must not tell him so much that the letter reads like the raving of a man who has seen things no man can see. He walks the line with the careful precision of someone threading a needle in low light. He names the White Walkers plainly. He does not soften it with maybe or perhaps, or the stories say. He writes, they are real, they're coming, and the men on the wall need dragonglass, need Valyrian steel, need to stop treating the ranging parties as expendable, and start treating them as the first soldiers in a war that has not yet declared itself publicly, but has already begun. He writes that the wildlings are not the enemy. He writes, and this takes the longest, that Jon should trust his own instincts on this, because whatever Jon has already seen or felt or suspected beyond the wall, he is right. He is not imagining it. He folds the letter, seals it with his own seal, not a steward's, sends it with a rider he trusts absolutely, with instructions that it passes through no other hands. He does not know how Jon will receive it. He knows only that when Jon reads the part about the wildlings, he will feel less alone in a position he has been defending in isolation for too long. And sometimes that is what a letter is for. Not to command, but to say, I know what you know, and I am behind you, and we are building toward the same thing from different ends. The letter to the east takes longer to construct and requires different tools entirely. A Braavosi merchant named Ferrigo Antarian, who trades in northern timber and has connections that extend considerably further than his ledgers suggest, receives a private communication from the king in the north 3 weeks after Robb's return to Winterfell. It is not a political letter. It carries no royal seal. It is personal in tone and careful in its asking, and it requests only the establishment of a channel, a way for words to travel discreetly across a very large body of water to a young woman with silver hair and 3 dragons and a claim to a throne that Robb, at present, has no stake in contesting. He does not ask Daenerys Targaryen to do anything. He asks only to be heard. There is a difference, and he is gambling that she is intelligent enough to understand it. Ferrego's reply comes faster than expected. The merchant is interested. The merchant believes the arrangement can be made. The merchant also mentions, in a line near the bottom of his response that is phrased with a delicacy that does not fully conceal its weight, that he is not the first person to have recently made contact with parties in that quarter on behalf of interests in Westeros, and that the previous approach had come not from any friend of the North, but from a source further south, with more gold than conscience, and a name that Ferrego declines, with notable care, to commit to paper. Robb sets that letter down on the desk beside the candle. He thinks about the letter that left this camp without his knowledge. He thinks about the name on its cover, still unknown to him. He thinks about the way that game within games tends to announce itself, not with trumpets, but with small threads that catch the light at the wrong angle and pull when they should not pull. And he is very still for a long moment, turning this new information over in his mind the way a man turns a stone to check what lives beneath it. Someone is already moving, someone with gold and connections and no interest in the North's survival has already reached toward Daenerys Targaryen. And Robb does not yet know what they offered, or what they want in return. But he knows, with the specific and unhappy certainty of a man who has watched a war turn on a single betrayal, that whoever it is has had a head start, and that head starts in this game have a way of mattering enormously. The cold comes first. It always does. Not the cold of autumn settling into the bones of Winterfell's stones. Not the cold of a northern campaign where men wrap themselves in wool and curse the wind. This is something older, something that does not belong to any season men have named. The ravens arrive from the wall carrying reports written in a hand that trembles, not from age, but from something the Maester at Castle Black cannot bring himself to name plainly, because plainly named things must be believed, and belief, in this case, costs more than most men are willing to pay. Robb reads each report as it comes. He has been reading them for years. He does not flinch. He does not summon his lords in a panic and watch their faces go pale and doubtful as he tries to explain what is moving beyond the wall. He has already explained. He explained 3 years ago in quiet chambers to men chosen for their steadiness rather than their rank, and those men have spent 3 years doing the work that panic would have prevented. The dragon glass comes out of storage now, not out of desperate scrambling. The shaped blades and the fire-hardened spear points and the obsidian arrowheads, packed in cloth and straw, move north on wagons that have been waiting, loaded and logged for the word to move. The word has come. The wagons roll. Jon Snow is already at Dragonstone before Robb needs to ask him to go. This is the thing about a plan built slowly and with patience. By the time the moment arrives for it to be executed, the people inside it already know their parts. Jon does not need a letter explaining what Daenerys Targaryen means to the North's survival. Robb has spent years talking to him, late in the evenings by firelight, mapping the logic of what is coming with the same methodical care he once applied to battlefield formations along the Trident. Jon listens in the way that Jon has always listened, quietly, seriously, with a stillness that suggests he is turning every word over and checking what lies beneath it. He understands. When the Targaryen ships are sighted rounding the coast toward Dragonstone, Jon is on the water before she has dropped anchor. The meeting between them is not easy. It is not meant to be easy. Daenerys arrives in Westeros carrying centuries of grievance and a throne she was raised to believe is hers by right, and Jon Snow is a bastard legitimized by a northern king who answers to no one, sent as an emissary for a man she has not met. The first conversation is careful, each sentence placed like a foot on uncertain ground. Jon does not flatter her. He does not perform the deference that her advisors expect. He tells her what is north of the wall in the same plain, serious voice that once convinced the free folk to trust a man in Night's Watch Black and Daenerys, who has learned to read the difference between men who believe what they are saying and men who only need her to believe it, watches his face throughout. She does not give him everything immediately. She is too careful for that. But she gives him the mountain of dragonglass beneath Dragonstone because it costs her nothing, and because something in his voice, or perhaps something in the briefing letters Robb has sent north, of every piece of intelligence gathered about her character and history, has told Jon exactly how to ask. The dragonglass moves north. The alliance takes shape. Robb has chosen the neck. He chose it 3 years ago, standing over a map with Rose Bolton's absence still fresh in his second life's memory, tracing the geography of the continent with a finger and asking himself where a man would stand to fight an enemy that does not tire, does not starve, does not feel the cold as an affliction. The neck is a bottleneck, marshland on both sides, a single causeway threading through the bog, and 3 years of preparation buried into every viable approach. Trenches dug and disguised, fire stations built and stocked, fallback strongholds raised at intervals along the retreat lines so that no single failure can become a rout. The men who built these fortifications know what they built them for. They have trained for close combat against opponents who do not stop when they are wounded, who must be burned or shattered or struck with weapons forged from volcanic glass to be stopped at all. The training has been brutal. It has also been relentless, which is the only thing that matters now. The combined force assembles over 3 weeks. Northern levies, hardened and properly equipped, moving into position with none of the disorganization that plagues an army raised in haste. The Night's Watch, diminished but committed. The free folk that Jon has spent years bringing south of the Wall, men and women who have faced the dead before and survived through knowledge rather than luck. Daenerys is unsullied, disciplined and fearless in ways that most southern soldiers are not, marching into position on the western flank. The Dothraki are harder to position. Cavalry is not made for marshland, but Robb has planned for this too, and they hold the eastern approaches where the ground is firmer. The dead come on the 3rd night after the force is fully assembled. They come in the dark, which is the only way they come, and the scouts along the outer markers light their signals in sequence, fire to fire, all the way back to the command position where Robb stands watching the horizon fill with something that moves wrong. He gives the order quietly. He has known what it would be for 3 years, but it is in the 2nd hour of the engagement when a rider comes hard from the eastern flank with news that should not yet be possible, that a section of the defensive line has collapsed from within. Fire stations found unlit, a gap carved through prepared ground as though someone knew precisely where to find it. That Robb feels the familiar cold of something other than winter move through him, and he thinks of the letter that left his camp without his knowledge, and the name still unknown to him, and the head start that head starts have always had. The gap does not close on its own. That is the first thing Robb understands as the rider finishes his report, breath ragged, horse foaming at the mouth from the run across uncertain ground. A section of the eastern defensive line, 3 fire stations dark, the prepared killing ground between them left open like a wound in the body of an otherwise careful plan. It does not happen by accident. It does not happen through cowardice or failure of nerve. Someone made it happen, and that someone is not among the dead. He sends Greatjon Umber to hold the gap with whatever can be moved without stripping the center. and he sends him with orders that are simple enough to follow in the dark and the chaos. Hold the ground, light everything that will burn, do not advance, and do not yield. Greatjon does not need to be told twice. He has never needed to be told twice about anything involving a fight. Robb watches him go and feels something settle inside him. Not comfort exactly, but the particular steadiness that comes from knowing a man will do what he says he will do. The dead press through Moat Cailin in waves that have no rhythm and no hesitation. They do not tire. They do not regroup. They simply come, and come, and come again. And the living hold them with dragonglass and fire and the grinding, exhausting discipline of soldiers who have been told exactly what they are facing and have chosen to stand anyway. The screaming is not what Robb remembered fearing most in the years he spent preparing for this. It is the silence of the dead themselves, the absence of any sound from them except the movement of bodies through water and marsh grass, the creak of frozen limbs, the impact of things that should not be walking pressing against the lines of men who very much do not want to stop walking themselves. That silence is its own kind of weapon, and Robb has spent 3 years telling his commanders to prepare their men for it. And still, in the second hour, he can see it working on the faces of the reserve troops who have not yet been committed, who stand behind the main line and listen and understand at last what they have actually come here to do. He commands with a quietness that surprises people who have only heard of Robb Stark and not yet stood beside him. There is no thundering of speeches, no riding the line with sword raised. He stands at the command position, and he watches, and he thinks. And when he speaks, it is to give precise instructions to precise men, and those instructions ripple outward through a chain of runners and signal fires and horn calls that he spent months designing for exactly this terrain. He has already died once. The fear that used to come with command, the fear of choosing wrong, of committing too early, of holding too long. That fear has no purchase on him anymore. He has made the worst choice a man can make in a war, and he has lived inside its consequences for 3 years, and there is nothing this battlefield can threaten him with that he has not already paid for. It is this quality that Jon Snow notices, riding in from the northern edge of the line where the ground is worst and the dead are thickest. Rhaegal's great wings beating a warm downwash over the marsh that briefly illuminates the scene below in amber and green. Jon has fought in the dark before. Jon has fought things that should not exist before. But he has not fought them with a plan this deliberate behind him, and the difference is the difference between surviving something and meaning to survive it. They had spoken of the Night King weeks before the army of the dead arrived, in the long firelit evenings when the marshes were still quiet, and there was time to think. Robb had told Jon everything he knew, or everything he believed he knew. The way the Night King raised the dead from among the fallen, the way that raising could reach even the prepared and the defended if enough bodies accumulated, the way the entire army was tied to him as a knot is tied to its rope. Pull the knot free and the rope falls. And he had told Jon something else, something that required Jon to trust him in a way that went beyond the reasonable, beyond the provable. He had told Jon that the Night King would come to where he thought the blow would land hardest, and that a strike team, small, quiet, moving against the grain of the battle, might reach him before he expected to be reached. It had been Jon's idea to use Rhaegal for the approach, not in a charge, not in the way dragonfire had been used to hold the main line. Something quieter, something that moved through the dark above the battle, while the battle held every pair of dead eyes fixed forward. Robb had listened to the plan and felt something move in him that he had not expected to feel, something that was almost relief. Jon Snow, who carried Targaryen blood without knowing for most of his life what it meant, had looked at a battlefield and found the line that cut through it cleanly, and it was the same line Robb had been searching for. The strike team is small. Tormund, for the sheer unbreakable quality of the man. Two of the free folk who know cold darkness better than most. Sir Brynden Tully, who asked to go and was not denied, because there are men whose experience makes them worth more in a knife's edge situation than a dozen younger soldiers. And Jon himself, armed with Longclaw and the dragonglass cache that has been kept separate from the main distribution for exactly this purpose. Rhaegal carries them in low and quiet over the northern marsh, while the main line holds and burns and holds again, and the Night King stands at the far edge of the press of dead, still and pale in the cold dark, watching his army work. He does not see the dragon until it is almost too late to matter. Almost. The Night King turns as Rhaegal comes down, and his eyes are the color of something that predates fire itself, and he raises one hand in the gesture that has ended thousands of lives and rewritten thousands of deaths. And Jon Snow is already moving, already off the dragon's back and onto the broken ground, and he is running, and Tormund is running beside him, and the dragonglass is in both their hands. What follows is not elegant. It is not the clean strike of a plan executed perfectly. The Night King catches Tormund with something that is not quite a blow and not quite cold, and sends him down hard into the marsh. One of the free folk does not get up again. Brynden Tully takes a wound to his sword arm that will trouble him for the rest of whatever life remains to him. But Jon reaches the Night King, and Longclaw finds its mark, and there is a sound that the survivors will spend the rest of their lives failing to adequately describe. A sound like winter breaking, like something very old deciding to stop. And the Night King comes apart in the dark like frost burned away by sudden sun. The army of the dead falls where it stands, not one at a time. All of them, all at once, the collapse spreading outward from the vanguard through the flanks and into the rear, until there is nothing moving in the marsh that was not already alive when the night began. The silence that follows is a different kind of silence from the silence of the dead pressing forward. It is the silence of men who have survived something they were not certain they would survive, standing in cold marsh water with weapons still in their hands, not yet able to believe that they are allowed to stop. Dawn comes slowly, the way it always does after a night like this. It finds them still standing or sitting, or kneeling beside the ones who are not standing anymore. It finds Robb Stark at the edge of the command position, looking east into the first pale line of real light on the horizon. Warm light, the kind that carries in it the suggestion of a world continuing. He has not slept. He will not sleep for a long while yet. There is too much still undone, and in the back of his mind, beneath the exhaustion and the grief and the strange, sober relief of a battle won, the letter sits. The gap in the eastern line that someone made. The name he does not have. Jon finds him there before the light is fully up, limping slightly, Longclaw sheathed, his face carrying the particular look of a man who has done what he came to do and is not yet sure how to carry the weight of having done it. They stand together for a moment without speaking. which is its own kind of speech. Then Robb says quietly that they need to talk about who opened the eastern line. Jon looks at him. The light is still coming. Somewhere behind them, someone is calling a name that does not get answered. The eastern line question has an answer. Eventually, it always does. The compact signed at the Council of Lords names no villain in its text, because the great lesson of 2 lifetimes of war is that naming villains in the founding documents of peace is how you write the seeds of the next war directly into the parchment. Robb knows this. He has lived the alternative. He lets the question sit in the record as an open wound, and then he lets it scar over, and then he lets it become a scar that nobody touches, and then, in the way of scars, it becomes simply part of the skin of things. The council itself takes 3 weeks. Lords arrive at the appointed place, still smelling of smoke and cold iron, still moving like men whose bodies have not yet accepted that the fighting has stopped. They argue about boundaries and succession, and the weight of crowns, and whether any crown at all should rest on any head after everything that has just been survived. Robb does not push his own claim. He never did. Not in this life. What he pushed for was something harder to name and easier to lose. The idea that the North and the rest of the realm might live in the same world without one consuming the other. It takes 11 days of argument before the room begins to believe him. It takes 3 more before they begin to believe each other. The compact is signed on the evening of the 14th day. Robb's hand moves across the parchment steadily, without ceremony. He watches the ink dry and thinks of a younger version of himself who made one great error in a single moment of pride, and how that error unraveled everything, and how the unraveling taught him the only lesson worth knowing, that nothing holds unless you are willing to hold it yourself, with patience, with your hands in the dark for as long as it takes. Months pass the way months do after war's end, slowly and then suddenly, winter giving way to a gray northern spring that smells of thawed earth and standing water and things beginning again. Winterfell is rebuilt stone by stone. Robb is there for every course of it. He carries rock when he is allowed to and supervises when he is not. And there are mornings when he stands at the edge of what is being rebuilt and cannot quite separate the physical structure from the one he has been quietly rebuilding inside himself for years. His father walks beside him on some of those mornings, older now in a way that Robb registers each time without speaking of it. The gray settled deeply into Ned Stark's beard and hair, the lines in his face carved by time and by everything he has seen and survived and outlasted. He should not be alive. In the first life, he was not. In this one, he is, and Robb has never found a way to look at him without feeling the particular quality of gratitude that has no clean opposite, the kind that simply sits in the chest and asks for nothing in return. There is one evening in particular, that autumn, that settles into the family's memory differently from the others, though it begins simply enough. Sansa arrives from the Vale with her retinue, and Arya arrives the same day from somewhere she will only describe in general terms, and with a slight smile that means she will not be giving more information than that. Jon comes in from the east with Ghost, who is enormous and gray-white and entirely unbothered by the noise of the reunited household. Bran sits at the long table in the great hall, quieter than he once was, with the particular stillness of someone who sees many things at once and has learned where to rest his gaze. Ned is at the head of the table. All of them are there. All 5 living in the same room in the warmth and the firelight, while outside, the first real cold of autumn presses against the old stones of the castle. Robb sits at the table and does not speak very much that evening. He does not need to. He watches his father's face as Arya makes a joke that lands well, and the whole table moves with the sound of it. And he watches Sansa lean toward Jon with something she wants him to know. And he watches Bran smile at a thing no one has said yet. Ghost sleeps by the fire with the absolute confidence of an animal that has never once doubted its place in the world. This is the thing he saw in his mind every day of his second life. Not the battles, not the political architecture. This room, this fire, these faces. He kept it like a candle in a closed hand, and he walked through everything he had to walk through with that small light cupped against the dark. And now it is not a memory or an imagining. It is simply evening in Winterfell, and everyone is home. Later, after the table is cleared and the hall has grown quieter, Robb wraps a cloak around his shoulders and walks out through the back of the castle into the Godswood. The heart tree stands as it always has, ancient and utterly still, its pale face turned toward the sky. The roots are cold beneath his hands when he kneels and presses his palms into the earth. He says nothing for a long time. Then, quietly, to no one and to everything, he says that he kept his vow, that he brought them home. The Godswood holds the words the way old things hold all words, given to them in sincerity, without judgment, without condition. Above him, the first stars of the evening appear one by one in the deep black of the northern sky, patient and indifferent and very beautiful, and Robb Stark stays there a while longer, his hands in the cold earth, his breath steady, the long war of his 2 lives finally, completely, at rest.